Big moves in terms of labor. This is exciting. All right, so in the same day that Donziger was released to home confinement from prison, Starbucks got their first U.S. union at a store in Buffalo. It was a big day for those sorts of things. So in a first, Starbucks workers agree to a union in Buffalo, New York. Now, we've been covering this story, so you guys probably know some of the details here, but there were 3 Starbucks stores that voted, and the tallies came out on Thursday. And so in this particular one, the Elmwood Avenue location, they voted 19-8 in favor of a union. A second store rejected the union in a vote of 12-8, but the union said it might challenge that result because it was not confident all the eligible votes had been counted. And the results of a third store could not be determined because both sides challenged seven separate votes. My understanding is that third store, it looked like they voted to unionize, but that now is being challenged again by both sides. In addition, there are 3 other stores in Buffalo and a store in Mesa, Arizona, that have filed petitions with the labor board for their own union elections, seemingly inspired by this movement in Buffalo. And what's interesting, so this is the first U.S. store to unionize for Starbucks. They threw everything
literally
they could at this effort to try to stop these workers from voting to unionize. Part of their effort was to appeal to the NLRB and try to get all of the workers in Buffalo who worked at any Starbucks to participate in the election. The NLRB said no to that, which is why it's important to have good people on the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board. They also tried to postpone the election. This is an important tactic, especially in the service industry where turnover is very high. The NLRB also shot that idea down. But even beyond that, I mean, they brought in executives to these stores to coerce and spy on employees. They flooded these stores with new workers so that they'd have to, bring them into the process of organizing and educate them and get them on board as well. They actually closed one store and turned it into a training location. I mean, they just did absolutely everything. They brought in Howard Schultz to do some big special anti-union event. That they closed all the Starbucks stores to invite to have their workers come and listen to them. They did these private listening sessions. I mean, they really went all out to stop this result. And yet still, we have at least one store, the Elmwood Avenue location, that voted pretty decisively here to unionize. It's a huge deal, honestly, Saagar.
Oh, it's massive. I mean, this is the first store. They fought everything they possibly could in order to make this happen. I mean, look, it is just one store. But all it takes in many of these cases is just a single one in order to spawn more people who want to try and do this store after store. And that's why the company fought it with every single thing that they had. It really does remain to be seen. It also could make it so that perhaps there are less unionization efforts, but simply in order to ward them off, they may have to raise wages all across the board. They may have to listen to a lot more of the way that the employees are talking, and in terms of employees coming to them and with their concerns, and in terms of saying, oh, well, we need better benefits here. We need, in order to have our hours in a certain way. So having all this just is a big warning shot across the bow at Starbucks management. That's why they treated it so seriously. And also, this makes a big spotlight on potential anti-unionization efforts that they're going to try and continue in the past. Everything they did actually didn't work. In many ways, it hardened people in terms of forming the union. So if they try in the future to try and close the stores down, bring in Howard Schultz, stack it with all these fake employees in order to try and rig the vote counts and more, you're still going to see a lot of public awareness around what they tried and how it ultimately failed. So it's a big, big deal, a symbolic victory, obviously not, the total one, but I think this is the beginning of the war more than anything.
Yeah, and listen, Buffalo has a history of union organizing.
Yeah, that's right.
And that labor history matters a lot. Iremy was saying to me, he doesn't think it's an accident that you had India Walton doing as well as she did in Buffalo and laying some of the groundwork. That those things, they do build on each other. So you see a little bit of movement in Buffalo, but I would love to know how much Starbucks spent to try to fight it. I mean, it has to be millions. To fly in all those executives, to rent the hotel, to have the big party. I mean, they were willing...
Million minimum, I think.
They were willing to throw so much money at shutting down even just this one store unionizing. It shows you what a threat they think it is. And I think that's really significant. And as I mentioned, you already have, following on the heels of this, additional stores filing with the NLRB to have their own union elections. So it could very well set off a bit of a domino effect. And that's a big deal because it's not just, Starbucks is an iconic brand.
Of course.
And organizing in the service sector like this is so tremendously difficult. I mean, you have high employee turnover. The way that the laws are written right now, it's every single individual store has to unionize one by one, and so it just makes it really extraordinarily difficult. But I also want to highlight, because our laws on unions are so crappy, and because the PRO Act is, nowhere in sight, this is the beginning of the battle for these workers, not the end.
Yes, exactly.
Because now what can happen is Starbucks can stonewall them. First of all, they can file all kinds of appeals. I'm sure they'll do that stuff. But they can stonewall them in terms of getting a contract. They can pretend to negotiate in good faith and just continue to push off and push off and push off. Even in Canada, there was a Starbucks in Victoria that voted to unionize in August of 2020. It took a full year for them to reach a collective bargaining agreement. I don't know the numbers in Canada. In US, that is the norm. It is a majority of new unions that a year later still don't have a collective bargaining, a contract with their employer. So this is the beginning of the fight. And because we don't have those PRO Act provisions in place, it means that can continue indefinitely. What we need is a clause in there that after a certain amount of time, it goes to mandatory arbitration so that they're forced to agree to some kind of contract, because as it is now, they can just push it off forever. There are even more aggressive tactics that companies have used. Dollar General had a store that voted to unionize, and they fought it, and they went through appeals process, and when it looked like they were going to lose, what did? They closed the store.
Shut it down. Yeah.
They closed the store. Now that should be technically illegal if it's directly in response to a union drive, but they can just come up with some fig leaf of an argument.
That's all you need.
Of why, it wasn't about the union, it was about some other profitability concern or whatever, and they close the store and that's that. So there's still a long way to go before this significant, really incredible, very exciting victory turns into real gains for these workers, but this is certainly a big, big step forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the next story that we wanted to bring in the labor movement actually highlights how even when you have a union, the deck is still stacked in favor of the employer. We've been following the strike at Kellogg's. It's 1,400 striking workers there. Kellogg's, their big concern has been, those workers' big concern has been the two-tier wage and benefit structure. So it's something we've seen repeated across a lot of the strikes that we covered, including the John Deere strike. And so Kellogg's had offered them a contract that the workers overwhelmingly voted down that kept that two-tier wage and benefit system in place. And so Kellogg's has now announced that they are going to replace all of those striking workers permanently. Again, something that should be illegal, but is not. And it would be illegal if the PRO Act were to pass, but it's not. So after a bit of time passed, Biden did decide to weigh in on this one, which, I applaud him for doing, but also there's a lot more he could do. Let's go ahead and throw this up on the screen. Biden says he's deeply troubled by Kellogg's move to permanently replace striking workers. That's all well and good, but what are you going to do about it? I mean, he's completely backed down on actually changing the law with regards to the PRO Act. He's sort of given up on that fight. There are a lot of people who said, this is unprecedented for a president to weigh in like this. It's actually not. Jonah Furman and others online pointed out that in July of '94, President Clinton said some very similar stuff about Caterpillar Inc. and their striking auto workers, that they should settle their bitter dispute and that this is poisonous to the labor movement, all that. And because he also didn't actually do anything, Caterpillar just continued doing what they wanted to do, and it didn't end well for the workers.
I remember reading about that. It was a big moment, actually, in terms of the strikes and how it eventually all played out. Guess where Caterpillar makes all of its stuff now? You'll never guess. This is, like you said, it's good. whenever you say stuff like deeply troubled. But I saw this, it's just like with Trump. Trump went to the Carrier plant. It was a huge thing. They said they were going to stay. And then 2 years later, they ended up offshoring anyway, right? Or outsourcing the jobs. It was, Foxconn, it was the same thing. There's so many of these different examples.
Yeah.
These presidents, they pay lip service. They're like, well, I'm on the side of these guys. And then, a couple of years later, what ends up happening? So Kellogg is probably going to get away with this, which is the really pathetic and terrible part. 1,400 workers right now set to be replaced after they rejected the contract. They think that they can weather the storm, and the sad part is they probably can. Most people aren't paying attention. I remember whenever we were talking to a Kellogg worker, they had record sales? Their profits are high, like very up. Demand
people ate
for
a lot
Kellogg
of cereal during the pandemic.
Exactly. People, packed on a little bit, including me, in terms of the pandemic 15. And part of that was cereal for many people. So they're doing okay. They think they can get away with this. The president, he put out a statement. But look, I used to work in the White House press corps. Presidents put out like 15 statements a day. Yes, they probably will note this, but overall PR, is it really going to make a difference? I don't think so, Krystal.
Yeah, I mean, he shows he's not willing to actually do the things that would be within his power.
And we saw this with Trump. You talk a big game, great. Harley Davidson. Yeah, I remember that one. It was like, Harley, you can't do anything. Tweets about it. They didn't care. You know why? Because if you don't force them to do anything, they're just going to take the hit, and most of you will still probably buy Harley, which is made in China.
Yeah,
that's just how it is.
The one thing workers do have going for them here doesn't have anything to do with Joe Biden. Has to do with the fact that it may be difficult right now to replace 1,400 people across these plants, especially without, lifting the wages and making the deal more attractive. So we'll see the success that they have filling in. And also, listen, you're starting from scratch. I mean, you're talking about a skilled workforce that knew what they were doing. And now you're going to start from scratch with people who have never done this job, never done this work, having to train everybody up. So even if you find enough people, it takes time to get this all cranking. And we saw what happened with John Deere when they tried to bring in
That's a great point.
a workforce that had no idea what they were doing, and it was terrible for them and dangerous for the workers involved. So I think Kellogg's is likely to face some very similar challenges here, trying to just writ large replace 1,400 striking workers, starting from scratch.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.